Manager says you're trespassing. Stand up and leave, now.
Officer, I'm a paying guest and I'm paralyzed. I cannot stand up.
I don't care. Stop playing games. Get out of that chair.
I'm reaching for my room key to prove it. Don't touch me. You're about to assault a disabled man on camera.
Officer, let's slow down. He is a registered guest.
Exactly. Room 1204. Want to verify?
Officer Derek Vance had spent 6 years on the Philadelphia police force, cultivating a reputation that he mistook for respect, but which his colleagues recognized as fear. At 29 years old, Vance was physically imposing, aggressively ambitious, and dangerously certain of his own instincts. He walked the beat with the swagger of a man who believed the badge granted him not just authority, but infallibility. He had come to view the streets not as a community to serve, but as a territory to conquer. On a bright Tuesday morning in October, that arrogance would lead him into the lobby of a luxury hotel and into a confrontation that would cost the city's taxpayers $4.5 million and cost Vance his freedom. The man he would target was Marcus Thorne. At 58 years old, Thorne was a man of quiet dignity and immense accomplishment, a retired architect who had helped design some of the city's most iconic skylines. Thorne was a fixture in the community, a deacon at his church, and a grandfather of 3. However, 2 years prior, a catastrophic car accident had left him paralyzed from the waist down, confining him to a high-tech motorized wheelchair. He had spent the last 24 months relearning how to navigate a world that was often indifferent to his new reality. He was currently staying at the Grand Meridian Hotel, a historic establishment in downtown Philadelphia, while his home underwent extensive renovations to make it fully accessible. It was 10:15 a.m. Sunlight streamed through the massive arched windows of the Grand Meridian, illuminating the dust motes dancing above the polished marble floors. The lobby was a sanctuary of hushed conversations, the clinking of porcelain from the espresso bar and the soft rustle of expensive newspapers. Thorne sat near the center of the room, positioned near a large potted fern. He was dressed for comfort in a high-end gray tracksuit and a breathable athletic shirt, clothing necessitated by his physical therapy sessions, but distinctively casual compared to the suits and ties that usually populated the Meridian's morning rush. Thorne was waiting for his daughter Elena to pick him up for a follow-up appointment with his neurosurgeon. He had a book open on his lap, a historical biography he'd been meaning to read for months, but his eyes were closed, enjoying the warmth of the sun on his face. He looked peaceful. He looked like a man taking a well-deserved moment of rest. But to the wrong eyes, peace can look like loitering, and casual clothing can look like vagrancy. Thorne had his room key card tucked safely in his pocket, his wallet in his side bag, and every right to be exactly where he was. But in the ecosystem of the Grand Meridian, rights were often secondary to appearances. Derek Vance was 3 blocks away in his patrol cruiser when the radio crackled to life. He was bored, sipping a lukewarm energy drink and scrolling through his phone, waiting for something, anything to break the monotony of a slow Tuesday. He craved action. He craved the adrenaline spike of a chase or the dominance of a takedown. When the dispatch call came through regarding a trespasser refusing to leave at the Grand Meridian, Vance didn't hear a request for assistance. He heard an opportunity to assert control. He put the car in gear, unaware that he was driving toward the end of his life as he knew it. Before we get into the footage that shocked the nation, I have to ask, where are you listening from today? If you believe in holding power accountable, please hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us keep these stories in the spotlight. The call to the police had been initiated by Brad Sterling, the Grand Meridian's newly promoted front-of-house manager. At 32 years old, Sterling was a man consumed by the anxiety of his new position. He wore suits that were tailored a little too tightly and spoke with a clipped artificial accent he thought sounded sophisticated. Sterling was desperate to prove to corporate ownership that he could maintain the exclusive atmosphere of the hotel. To him, the Grand Meridian wasn't just a hotel. It was a stage, and the actors needed to look the part. Sterling had been watching Marcus Thorne for 15 minutes from behind the concierge desk. He didn't see a retired architect or a paying guest. He saw a black man in a tracksuit. He saw a wheelchair that took up too much space. He saw someone who didn't fit the aesthetic of the morning business crowd. In Sterling's biased calculus, Thorne was likely a homeless man who had rolled in from the street to enjoy the air conditioning and the free Wi-Fi. It never occurred to him to check the guest registry or simply walk over and ask, "How can I help you, sir?" Instead, Sterling convinced himself that Thorne was a security risk. He signaled to a bellman, whispering, "Keep an eye on him. I don't want him bothering the paying guests." The bellman, a younger man who had actually greeted Thorne pleasantly earlier that morning, looked confused. "Mr. Thorne. He's staying in the presidential suite, isn't he? I think he checked in 2 days ago." Sterling waved him off, his face flushing with irritation. "Don't be naive. Look at him. He's asleep. He's loitering. It looks bad." Sterling decided to handle it himself, but not by speaking to Thorne. He went into his office and dialed the non-emergency police line, though his voice carried the panic of an emergency. "This is the manager at the Grand Meridian," he told the dispatcher. "I have a situation in the lobby. There is a hostile individual refusing to leave the premises." The dispatcher asked the standard questions. "Is he armed? Is he violent?" Sterling hesitated, looking through the glass at the sleeping man. He's being aggressive. He's disrupting the guests. I've asked him to leave and he's refusing. I need an officer to remove him immediately." It was a fabrication. Sterling hadn't spoken a word to Thorne. He hadn't asked him to leave. He hadn't verified his status. He simply wanted the eyesore gone before the regional vice president arrived for a scheduled walkthrough at noon. Sterling wanted the lobby pristine, and in his mind, a black man in a wheelchair wearing sweatpants was a blemish on that perfection. He hung up the phone feeling a surge of power. He had solved the problem, or so he thought. The dispatcher logged the call as a priority 2 trespass, noting the caller's description of a hostile male refusing to vacate. This information was relayed to Officer Vance's computer terminal. Vance read the words hostile and refusing, and his jaw set. In his mind, the narrative was already written. He wasn't going to a hotel to investigate a misunderstanding. He was going to extract a problem. He didn't know the man was paralyzed. He didn't know the man was a millionaire guest. He only knew that someone had defied authority, and that was something Derek Vance did not tolerate. Officer Derek Vance had a file. It was the kind of personnel file that gave internal affairs commanders ulcers yet somehow never resulted in termination. In his 6 years on the force, Vance had accumulated 14 complaints. Most were for discourtesy or unprofessional conduct, euphemisms for bullying, but 3 were for excessive force. In one instance, he had tackled a teenager for jaywalking, breaking the boy's collarbone. In another, he had pepper-sprayed a diabetic man suffering from low blood sugar because he failed to follow instructions. In every case, the police union had stepped in. The reports were sanitized. The insufficient evidence stamps were applied. Vance had learned a dangerous lesson: he was untouchable. His supervisors wrote in his evaluations that he was proactive and high-energy code words for an officer who generated arrest numbers regardless of the quality or legality of those arrests. He had never been disciplined for ignoring medical distress, despite 2 prior complaints alleging exactly that. He viewed medical claims by suspects as manipulation tactics, lies designed to slow him down. When Vance pulled his cruiser up to the curb of the Grand Meridian, he didn't park in a legal spot. He left the vehicle in the fire lane lights, flashing a visual declaration of his presence. He adjusted his belt, checking the placement of his taser and his firearm. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, sunglasses on despite being indoors chewing gum rhythmically. He looked the part of the enforcer. He exited the vehicle and strode through the revolving doors. The air conditioning hit him cool and crisp. He didn't stop at the front desk to consult with Brad Sterling. He didn't ask for details on the hostile subject. He scanned the lobby, his eyes hunting. He saw the business suits, the tourists with luggage, and then he saw Marcus Thorne. Thorne was the only person who matched the description of out of place in Vance's biased worldview. Vance walked straight toward him. His body camera was recording the little red light blinking, capturing every second of the disaster that was about to unfold. He bypassed the hotel security guard, who started to approach him, waving him away with a dismissive hand. Vance focused entirely on Thorne, who was still reading his book, peaceful and unaware. The officer's approach was aggressive. He didn't walk, he marched. His hand rested on his utility belt, not quite on his gun, but close enough to send a message. He stopped 3 feet from Thorne's wheelchair, blocking the sunlight that had been warming the older man's face. Thorne sensed the shadow and looked up, squinting slightly. He expected a waiter asking if he wanted more water. Instead, he saw the dark uniform, the sunglasses, and the sneer of Officer Vance. "We have a problem here," Vance asked, his voice booming in the quiet lobby. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Thorne blinked, confused, marking his page in the book. "Excuse me, officer," he said, his voice deep and raspy from sleep. "I'm not sure what you mean." Vance stepped closer, invading Thorne's personal space. "Don't play dumb with me. The manager wants you gone. You're trespassing. Time to go." Marcus Thorne had spent 30 years navigating the complex politics of city planning boards and high-stakes construction contracts. He knew how to handle aggression. He remained calm, his hands resting visibly on his lap. "Officer, there must be a mistake," Thorne said, his tone measured and polite. "I'm a guest at this hotel. I'm staying in Suite 404. I'm waiting for my daughter." Vance didn't hear him, or rather he chose not to process the information. In Vance's experience, everyone he stopped lied to him. "I don't care what story you're cooking up," Vance snapped. "Management says you're loitering and making people uncomfortable. You need to leave. Now." Thorne shifted in his chair, the leather creaking slightly. "I can prove I'm a guest. My key card is right here in my pocket." He moved his right hand slowly toward his tracksuit pocket. "Don't reach," Vance yelled, his hand dropping to his holster. The sound echoed through the lobby. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Brad Sterling, watching from the safety of the concierge desk, felt a sudden pit in his stomach. This was escalating faster than he intended, but he didn't intervene. He didn't want to admit he hadn't verified the guest's status. Thorne froze his hand, hovering over his pocket. "Officer, I am reaching for my room key. I am a 58-year-old man in a wheelchair. I am not a threat to you." Vance stepped back, assessing the man. The wheelchair didn't register as a medical necessity to him. It registered as a prop. He had seen panhandlers use wheelchairs before. He decided this was just another scam artist refusing to comply. "I'm done asking," Vance said, his patience evaporating. "You want to play games? Fine. Stand up. Get your stuff and walk out of here before I arrest you for criminal trespass." Thorne looked at the officer, a look of genuine incredulity on his face. "Officer, I can't do that." "I said stand up," Vance barked, pointing toward the door. "Stop the passive resistance. Get up and walk away." "I cannot stand up," Thorne repeated, enunciating every word clearly. "I am a paraplegic. I am paralyzed from the waist down. I cannot walk." This was the off-ramp. This was the moment where any reasonable human being, let alone a trained law enforcement officer, would pause, reassess, and investigate. But Derek Vance was not reasonable, and at this moment he was blinded by confirmation bias. He saw a man defying a lawful order. He interpreted Thorne's refusal to stand not as a physical impossibility, but as a challenge to his authority. "I'm not going to tell you again," Vance said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "You can drop the act. I've seen it all before. You're going to stand up and walk out, or I'm going to drag you out. Your choice." "I am paralyzed," Thorne said again, his voice rising slightly in desperation. "Please ask the front desk. Ask anyone. I literally cannot stand up." "Last warning," Vance said, stepping forward again. "Stand up." The lobby of the Grand Meridian was now a theater of horror. Dozens of guests had their phones out. The silence was heavy, broken only by the officer's heavy breathing and the soft hum of the hotel's air system. Marcus Thorne gripped the armrests of his chair, bracing himself. He knew with a terrifying certainty that this man was going to hurt him. "I am complying to the best of my ability," Thorne said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and rage. "I am telling you I am disabled. You are making an illegal demand." "That's it!" Vance shouted. "You're under arrest for obstruction and trespassing." Vance lunged forward. He grabbed the handle of the wheelchair and yanked it backward. The chair was heavy, a customized medical device weighing over 300 pounds. The brakes were engaged. The chair skidded an inch, but didn't roll. Vance, infuriated by the resistance of the machinery, assumed Thorne was physically fighting back. "Stop resisting!" Vance screamed. He released the handle and moved to the front of the chair. He grabbed Thorne by the lapels of his tracksuit jacket. "Officer, don't!" a woman screamed from a nearby table. "He's disabled!" Vance ignored her. He planted his feet and pulled. Thorne's body dead weight from the waist down slid forward. The seatbelt across his lap dug into his abdomen, the only thing keeping him in the chair. Vance saw the belt and snarled. He reached down, unbuckled it with a violent click, and then hauled Thorne forward with all his strength. "No, my legs, watch my legs!" Thorne cried out, a sound of pure agony that the Bodycam microphone picked up with sickening clarity. Vance didn't stop. He dragged the older man out of the safety of the chair. Thorne hit the marble floor hard. The sound was a dull, wet thud. His legs, atrophied and fragile, twisted unnaturally beneath him. His surgical scars, still healing from a procedure 2 weeks prior, were stretched to the breaking point. Vance didn't help him up. He flipped Thorne onto his stomach, jamming a knee into the man's lower back, a back that had been reconstructed with titanium rods. Thorne screamed a guttural sound of shock and pain. "I can't feel my legs. You're breaking my back." "Shut up and give me your hands," Vance yelled, wrenching Thorne's arms behind him. He slapped the handcuffs on, tightening them until they bit into the skin. Thorne lay face down on the cold hotel floor, humiliated, broken, and terrified. His empty wheelchair sat next to him, a silent testament to the absurdity of the violence. Vance stood up, breathing hard, looking down at his conquest. "Now get up and walk to the car," he commanded, still clinging to his delusion. Thorne lay sobbing into the marble. "I told you, I can't walk." The chaos in the lobby had reached a fever pitch. Guests were shouting at the officer. Brad Sterling, the manager, was hiding in his office, realizing he had just destroyed his career. But the real turning point came with the sound of running heels clicking furiously against the marble. Sergeant Miller, a 25-year veteran of the force, burst through the revolving doors. He had heard the radio chatter and the escalating tone of Vance's voice. He arrived just as another figure entered from the side entrance, Elena Thorne. Elena was dressed in a sharp navy power suit, carrying a briefcase. She was a corporate litigator for one of the top firms in Philadelphia, known for her ruthlessness in court. She looked up and saw the crowd. She saw the police officer. And then she saw the wheelchair. "Dad!" she screamed, dropping her briefcase. She sprinted across the lobby. Vance turned, putting a hand up. "Back up, ma'am. This is a crime scene." Elena ignored him. She slid onto her knees beside her father, who was groaning in pain. She saw the handcuffs. She saw the twisted angle of his legs. She looked up at Vance, and her eyes were cold enough to freeze fire. "What did you do to him?" "He refused to leave. He refused to stand up," Vance said, though his voice wavered slightly. He saw the resemblance. He saw the expensive suit. "He's a paraplegic, you idiot," Elena screamed, her voice cracking. "He can't stand up. He's staying in the presidential suite. Look at his key." Sergeant Miller reached them. He looked at the man on the floor, then at the wheelchair, then at Vance. Miller's face went pale. He had worked with Vance long enough to know the kid was a liability, but this was a catastrophe. "Vance, did you verify his ID?" Miller asked, his voice low and dangerous. "He wouldn't show it. He was reaching for a weapon. Vance stammered. Elena reached into her father's pocket and pulled out the gold key card with the Grand Meridian logo. She held it up to Vance's face. This is the weapon. It's a room key. Miller snatched the key. He walked over to the nearest elevator bank, swiped it, and the light turned green. He walked back, his face grim. Uncuff him. Now. Sarge, he was resisting. Vance started. I said take the cuffs off Vance right now. Miller roared, causing Vance to flinch. Vance knelt down, his hands shaking. As he unlocked the cuffs, he looked at Thorne's face. The older man was sweating profusely, his skin gray. My back, Thorne whispered. Something popped. Elena was already on her phone. I need an ambulance at the Grand Meridian immediately. Officer-involved assault. The victim is a post-op paraplegic. Get here now. She hung up and turned to Miller. You better hope he walks again. You better pray. Vance stood up, the reality of the situation finally piercing his armor of arrogance. He looked around. Dozens of phones were pointed at him. He looked at the manager's desk. Sterling was nowhere to be seen. He looked at Sergeant Miller, who was staring at him with a look of pure disgust. Give me your badge and your gun, Miller said quietly. Sarge, hand them over. You're done. The video hit the internet before the ambulance even left the curb. The title was Simple Philly Cop Drags Paralyzed Man Out of Wheelchair. Within 2 hours, it had 3 million views. The imagery was undeniable. There was no context that could explain away an officer screaming, "Stand up," to a man with no muscle function in his legs. There was no justification for dragging a surgical patient across a marble floor. The fallout was nuclear. Protesters gathered outside the Grand Meridian that evening. The hotel's corporate headquarters issued a statement firing Brad Sterling before the sun went down, citing gross negligence and discriminatory profiling. But the public wasn't interested in the manager. They wanted the officer. Marcus Thorne was rushed to intense surgery. The fall had dislodged 2 of the titanium rods fusing his spine. The infection risk from the floor contact with his surgical wounds was high. He spent 3 weeks in the ICU battling a sepsis infection that nearly killed him. The progress he had made in 2 years of rehabilitation was wiped out in 30 seconds of police brutality. He would need extensive, painful surgeries just to return to the baseline of being able to sit in his chair without agony. The Philadelphia Police Department tried to get ahead of the story, but the internal file leaked. A local reporter obtained Vance's history of ignored medical complaints. The narrative shifted from one bad apple to a system that let a monster keep his badge. The police commissioner was forced to hold a press conference where he looked tired and defeated. He announced that Officer Derek Vance had been suspended without pay pending termination, but the public demanded more. The district attorney, who knew Elena Thorne personally, announced criminal charges against Vance, aggravated assault, official oppression, and deprivation of civil rights. Vance's mugshot, looking much smaller and less arrogant than he did in the lobby, was plastered across every news station in the country. The civil lawsuit was filed 10 days after the incident. Thorne versus City of Philadelphia, Derek Vance, and the Grand Meridian Hotel. The complaint was a masterclass in legal devastation drafted by Elena Thorne's firm. It cited violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Fourth Amendment violations, excessive force, and negligent hiring. The city's lawyers took one look at the Bodycam footage, then at Thorne's medical bills, then at the jury demographics, and folded. There was no defense. You cannot order a paralyzed man to walk. You cannot arrest a guest for sitting in the lobby. The settlement was historic $4.5 million from the city to Marcus Thorne. The hotel settled separately for an undisclosed amount rumored to be in the 7 figures. Derek Vance was terminated and stripped of his police certification, meaning he could never work in law enforcement again. He was eventually convicted of simple assault and reckless endangerment, sentenced to 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service, a sentence many felt was too light, but one that permanently marked him as a criminal. Marcus Thorne survived, but he was never the same. The carefree peace he had felt that morning in the sun was gone, replaced by a hypervigilance that made leaving his home difficult. He used a portion of the settlement to start a foundation dedicated to legal defense for disabled victims of police violence. In the end, the money didn't fix his back. It didn't take away the memory of being dragged like luggage across the floor. It didn't erase the humiliation of being handcuffed while helpless. But it sent a message. It forced a city to look in the mirror. This story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How many Derek Vances are patrolling our streets right now? How many Brad Sterlings are managing our hotels? And what happens when there are no cameras? What do you think? Should officers be required to undergo specific training on interacting with citizens with disabilities? Should managers face criminal liability for weaponizing the police against minority guests? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going. And if you want to help us shine a light on more stories like this, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, stay safe and know your rights.